Okay, I'm excited to see this many teachers today. So welcome to the AESA Science Olympiad Virtual Teachers Workshop, Train the Trainer. We try to model our workshops after the LA County so that we are in line with their requirements, the state requirements, and etc. So we'll get started with our mission for AESA is the STEM Academy, and also was the vision for AESA Science Olympiad Committee. The CDBG requirement for the California community development projects in Glendale City that we have got an award for $10,000. So we'll just go over some information about that. Then Ms. Lida Gevorkian will give us a presentation about LA County Science Fair requirements. What are the steps to go through? And Dr. Hagop Injeyan will give us his perspective as a judge, what they're looking for on the projects. So the STEM Academy mission and goals, I'll be reading it off of the slide, is Armenian Engineers and Scientists of America is a nonpartisan and non-sectarian philanthropic organization focused primarily on addressing the professional, technical, and scientific needs of the Armenians throughout the world. The STEM Academy's mission is to establish a global platform to centralize and expand AESA's mission on mentoring young students to facilitate STEM knowledge. So we try to align our STEM Academy's missions and goals under the AESA's mission as well. And the goals is to educate the 6th through 12th grade students to get them more knowledge outside of the textbooks. And AESA is ready to support in any means possible to mentor the kids globally. We mentioned here Armenian, but we're welcoming any nationality here. And for Science Olympiad, this has been our mission, is to increase the interest in sciences and engineering among young Armenian students, foster their knowledge beyond confines of classrooms throughout mentorship and learning opportunities, and provide recognition of outstanding achievements from students and teachers through scholarships. The vision is to nurture our students' passion from engineering and science by providing them with platform and resources needed to become future contributors of our global society. We really try to encourage our students to continue in science and engineering fields rather than lawyer or businessman, as we see the high need for it as well. So very quickly, the CDBG is a Community Development Block Grant awarded to AESA STEM Academy for the year of 2021 to 2022. This one is to support our STEM Academy robotics program and also the Science Olympiad program. Robotics is offered as classes, whereas Science Olympiad is offered as a competition. So I didn't put too much here, but we have up to 15 students that we can allow to participate in Science Olympiad through the CDBG. That is free of cost to them. And the mentorship, of course, is free for everyone that's going to be participating, regardless of the CDBG or not. And this one is awarded to us from Glendale City. So preferably the students need to be from Glendale City. And in the case of CDBG, the nationality does not matter. They can be non-Armenians as well. So these are the tentative dates that we have decided to have so far for the students' workshop dates. After the teachers is basically the teachers' workshop is to give you some information about our requirements, and then if you have students that are interested and need mentors or like need further guidance, this will be our dates: November 13, December 4, January 22nd, and February 19. As we get like November 13 will be for sure, but then the other dates we'll post you and inform you as we get closer to it. And because the Lake County Science Fair is in the week of March 14, we wanted to make sure that the student has at least 2 weeks to prepare for their projects for LA County, to get more experience. Unfortunately, this year will be for the 21st annual Science Olympiad will be in February, end of February. Okay, the benefits in participating in Science Olympiad is we do provide mentors, even for Armenia students in Armenia. Globally, they're available. Thankfully, with Zoom or like the online platform, the student can connect with mentors from other states as well, if the local mentors for any reason cannot join. We do have professionals, and also we do have AESA student chapters from CSUN, USC, UCLA, GCC, that are ready and willing to mentor the high school or elementary school students. They do get judged on the day of the Science Olympiad by professionals and engineers and scientists who have the experience, like Dr. Injeyan with LA County, with the international science fairs. So it gives them more perspective what to look for. And we have monetary awards for first through third places and other nations. There's more awards or benefits participating, because when the student gets judged by Science Olympiad, they kind of get that experience ahead of time before Lake County, so they're not as nervous, they're not as scared, and they do know what to anticipate when they go to LA County Science Fair. That's all I have for my portion. Any questions? No? Okay.
If students are interested in getting mentors, who do they contact? How do we connect them to mentors? How does it work?
You ask them to send us an email. Before we tried to use the Google form and everything, but it didn't. Students were not as willing to send us emails, so or submit through there. So I think just emailing us at aesa.soc@gmail.com. We'll try to connect them with someone, knowing what area they're interested in.
Okay, perfect.
And as I mentioned, just for encouragement, if the student is interested at an early age, like 5th grade, we do allow them to participate to get that experience ahead of others.
Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Next, I'm gonna give the floor to Ms. Lida Gevorkian. She will discuss the LA County Science Fairs, but just a brief introduction to her, and then she can expand on it. Is Ms. Lida is a science fair coordinator, the department chair at Chamlian School, and since 2001. She has been one of 10 members at Judges Advisory Committee at California State Science Fair for 3 years. She's a member of Project of Abstract Review Committees for 5 years. She has been coordinating this science fair since 2001 and been a judge at LA County and state science fairs. And even participated in AESA Science Olympiads. Been many years, she's been our Teachers Award winner, AESA Science Olympiad Teachers Award winner. And the last one, I believe, was 2019. There was a gap in between that we didn't do our Science Olympiad. The students love her, and she's been a great, I don't know, like a mentor to those kids, and I guess like a role model, because a lot of them still continue to join us even after they graduate from Chamlian School to participate in Science Olympiad.
You're making her blush.
Well,
Uh,
yeah. Ms. Lida Gevorkian, the floor is yours. I believe you can share your screen too.
Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. I hope I sent to the compliments and the things that you said, and they won't be disappointed. Okay. Just give me a minute. Sorry, I should have prepared this before, but give me a second.
We have another participant.
Okay. Was my mentor when I started. Okay, so.
Sorry to interrupt, Ms. Lida. I just wanted to also point that this seems to be Dr. Hagop Injeyan as well. Both
this one, maybe, yeah, maybe.
It looks like him.
I don't think so, because I haven't seen Dr. Injeyan in county competitions. I've seen him in state, but I haven't seen him in county.
Okay.
I don't think that's him. Okay, so we're starting now. The first thing I started with the students is to explain to them that why we're doing this torturing work, because for them and for the parents, there's always complaints and they're not very happy to do science fair. So we have to convince them that this is something you benefit from. So now we will see that why we encourage them. So actually, the goals of the science fair is that students should understand that they get an opportunity to work on some projects, some ideas that is above and is not in their curriculum. So it's not, you cannot find that in the textbook, and it encourages you to do some inquiries, to do some research and come up with ideas. Then if you ask from the students who participated and got awarded, you will see that publicly recognition achievement was really huge for them. And besides, I encourage them to participate and push themselves to get the best that they can do, because this really looks good in their resume when they're entering high school. And surprisingly, as we mentioned before, when they go to high school, they're so motivated that they continue. Increase the knowledge about surrounding. That I always encourage them that the view of a scientist is to look for even simple things that is happening around them, to figure out why the things are happening the way it's happening. So it doesn't have to involve a title that has very complicated, hard to pronounce, some Latin words. It could be very simple idea that they dig deep and find the reason of the happening, and they are conducting experiments. So basically learning the scientific method, which is to conduct an experiment, collect data, analyze data, make conclusion based on the data. Now, the thing is that I explained to them this part too, that in next generation science and standards, which is NGSS, every chapter that you start in your textbook, one of the objectives is to apply scientific method. So it's a big chunk of the science standards. So we are not, and I tell them that I'm not here to torture you, but this is part of the standards that you have to learn, because in future, even they have started now, in math, in science, more important is the application, that knowing the, okay, you may memorize all the laws of physics and chemistry, and you memorize all the formulas in your math, but if you don't know how to apply, it's pointless, because stepping to high school, application is more important than memorization. So education is not to memorize, is to understand. That's how you learn. And project-based learning, again, is now, and is going to be more in future, is the project-based learning, PBL, that you're trying to involve students in hands-on projects, that they practice what they have learned, creating a reason to learn and understand essential content, increasing confidence through oral presentation. So when the student is sitting in front of a panel and starts to explain the project and is prepared to answer any questions that involves the science of the project, prepares them for future discussions and oral presentations. Science fair integrates, if in school administration, or let's say in departments, when you want to discuss the purpose and the goal, it can integrate different subjects. For example, what we were doing was collaboration between English and science. And which part is that? The research. So English teacher was coming in for that portion, explaining how to do proper research and how to go to different steps. Or the math teacher can be involved in doing the data analysis part, making the graphs, making the graph and data collection that involves measurement units and the nice presentation. So a student must be capable of deciding, okay, the data I collected, should I present in a line graph, or it's a bar chart, or it's a pie chart, you know, which one will present the data better, and what is the science behind that? Sorry, I don't know why is this speaking. Now, we strongly advise that the parents help the students. There is no mystery to any judge at any level, and to county science fair and the state science fair, that the students who are doing sometimes projects that gets them some scholarships, gets them some high grants, and involves them in specific projects, is they have done the work with help. The problem is not how much help they get. The problem is that they have to digest all the concepts that they have been helped. So they should be able to present and discuss all the aspects of the fair. So parental support is often a critical component of a great science fair project. Now, how they choose a topic. And these are the things that they have to avoid. If the topic is too general, for example, does the plant grow better with fertilizer? Okay, be specific. If you want to use fertilizer, be specific. Focus on the content of different ingredients in fertilizer. Focus on one or two contents. Find the percentage of each content of the contents that ingredients that your goal is in different fertilizers. See how the concentration changes and how that affects the growth. They should be specific. if it requires too much time. Now, this is an example I always give to my students. They believe that the music helps the plant grow. Yeah, the music helps the plant grow. It's a fact. It has been proved by a group of scientists conducting experiment in collaboration with together for 2 years, collecting thousands of data. Then finally, they got, yes, it affects. A student in 3 weeks cannot see the effect of music on the growth of the plant. It's impossible. So if it requires too much time, if they cannot get the results that they're looking for, and it's pointless. If you conduct experiment and you cannot collect data, there is no reason for your project. Don't involve experiments. Okay, survey. Now I'm gonna go and collect data from different surveys online and present that. No, that is, first, it's not your data collected, and second, it's that you didn't conduct any experiment. Present replicas or models. Usually the 7th graders, because 6th grade participants are not going to county competitions. So we're a little bit lenient with them and flexible. So they might be interested to do a science fair project that involves eruption of a volcano. Yeah, that's an activity. Or, you know, just pulling, hi,
But
hi Don, how are you? Why you're here?
I've been invited.
Oh, okay. So
Because it's
we have an honorary guest. Okay, so present replicas or models. You know, for example, the student may make a perfect model of a heart with all the compartments and all the tissues and blood vessels and everything perfect. But that's just an activity. That's not a science project. Involve experiments that merely find out what happens if I do this. Yes, I can be excited to mix certain things to see what's happening. But again, does it involve any collection of data? If it's not, it's no point. Involve experiments that present results without analysis. Okay, I did all the work, I grew all the plants, I collected data. At the end, I'm not presenting my data and I'm not analyzing. I don't know what was the reason that this plant grew better or the other one didn't. Why the one of the plants died. I don't have any analysis on that. And here on these slides, there are embedded links that if you hear, unfortunately, that because I'm a slideshow, I cannot go to the link. It won't let me. And if you go on this link, it presents a JPL presentation, a video that explains that why to do science fair, how to do science fair is pretty good. And the second point here is to receive approval to start the project. This is the part that my students and the parents are complaining. One of the parents told me once that, how many project topics should we submit in order to get approval? I said, I'm sorry, I'm not declining because I have an ego trip. I don't want to prove that, oh, I'm making decision, but I want them to not waste 3 months on something that is not worthy of work. You know, but on the other note, I should say that sometimes I give up. I see that this student cannot do any better. You know, one thing that I have learned, and now it's carved on the stone, that you can't do miracle. It's impossible. So there are certain things that you can do, and certain things, no matter how hard you try, you end up with the same results. So for saying that, because there might be some students that no matter how many times you define the topic, they won't get any better unless you hand them a topic and do the experiment and do the work for them. Okay, background research and learning about the theory behind the law. So we encourage them to do research before they make a hypothesis. And they design the experiment that should be approved too. And name a control group. They should have a control group in order to compare. For example, if they're using fertilizer, if they want to grow a plant without fertilizer, so to compare the results. And they should report and determine the number of trials they have to repeat the trials, because sometimes the data you have collected, it might have an outlier that is just throwing off your graphs and everything. So by repeating and getting the average, you will do better work. And recording in the logbook, because logbook is one of the requirements of the county. Among the slides that the students are sending, submitting to the county, one of the slides, or 3 slides actually, they have to present 3 essential pages of their logbook. Logbook should not be polished, should not be typed. It's better if it's handwritten. If there are sketches of some instruments and apparatus that they're working, using, doing the calculations, and as I said, recording the data handwritten, that puts more value on the logbook as opposed to clean, polished pages pasted on the notebook. These are the different categories. County has 26 categories, and there are many, many varieties. You see for physics, there are many varieties because many subsections, I would say, because the number of the students in that category is too many. If they don't want to break it down, it will be maybe 150 students only in that section, and that's not possible to judge in one day. So that's why they have the breakdown for the physics, for aerodynamics, hydrodynamics, electricity, general, and also their behavior science and animal biology. But this is something that we can look at it, and county provides all that information for the science fair coordinator. And at the end, you will see that there is a tablet that provides all the information. Now, pre-approval projects. You know, I had a workshop for county too, and as we were reviewing what we're presenting, they agreed that we shared this with the teachers, that as much as possible, stay away from pre-approval projects. And based on my personal experience, pre-approval projects takes a lot of work, and especially this year. Year by year, they're increasing the security factors and the requirements for pre-approval projects. And this year, especially with the COVID, they have extended that. So there are so many things that if you even get close to the idea, you have to get pre-approval. And for pre-approval, there's certain procedure, there's certain requirements. And again, there are links at the end. I will show you the links that tells the requirements for each category or what kind of projects needs pre-approval. November 12 is deadline for submission of pre-approvals. And then December 10th. So first time the student is submitting, and that's after the school is enrolled, because the student by himself or herself cannot participate. After the school is registered, and the science fair coordinator should be in connection with the student submission, they submit with all the details of their procedure, of the safety rules, how they make sure that, for example, if they're growing bacteria, what are the safety rules that they have to consider, how they discard that, how they work, what is the facility they are using, who's the advisor. So many requirements. And after they submit, if the student submits, they get a response from SRC committee, safety review committee. And they mention the changes or suggestions or requirements. The student has a second chance by December 10th to resubmit. At this stage, you cannot submit a new idea. So this is only for projects that have been already submitted to SRC committee. So the second deadline is December 10th, after making all that changes and providing all the information they're asking. So if the second time they decline, you're out. And when they say you're out, it's no joke. I mean, if I present that to students that required pre-approval and didn't get approval, right away when we submit, it will be declined. And I'm losing a seat. So each school can participate in county with 13 projects. And if one of the students is declined, I cannot replace with another student. that's gone. So that's why I'm very big about the pre-approval projects. If they are approved, then they can advance. Student online registration, there is a deadline, and by February 14, they should be signed. And of course, the science fair coordinator has to approve their participation. And there is a deadline for that too. So because of this deadline considerations, the timeline is for students is very crucial and essential. The team projects, okay, this is again, each school can participate for county competition with 13 projects, 13 entries. 3 of them can be team project, and the maximum people in a team could be 3 people only. But the team project must justify the work of more than 1 person. So 3 people cannot sit there and watch the water boiling and see how the salt affects the boiling temperature. That's not acceptable. Or how the surface area of the container affects the evaporation rate. That's not acceptable. The project must involve a lot of work, a lot of data collection, and every team member should have a unique contribution to the project and be able to justify their participation. So it's not that usually I try to let them know that I'm not going to let any team projects, because, you know, usually they come with some ideas that even for 1 person is too late. And these are the dates that February 14th, student project online registration closes. March 9, all virtual submissions due 11:59. And when they're saying 11:59 is no joke. Right on that 12 o'clock is closed. And if it's closed and you pass the deadline, no excuses acceptable. They won't open for you. And what judges expect: enthusiasm. An interview can be fun. Try in your project and accomplishments. Give as much information as possible, but be able to explain your projects clearly and concisely. To be able to answer questions appropriate to your grade level. Some of the judges are asking some questions that is not appropriate for the grade level, but I don't blame them, because if we're competing for county, we should be above the grade level. And the judges will want to know how the project topic was selected, if the student received help, and if so, how much. So if my dad did all the work for me in his lab, you know, that's not my project. What did the student learn through the investigation and experiment? What he or she do if she had more time? And students awarded first, second, third place, and first, second, third place in county go to state competition. And they also, first place, can participate in Broadcom Masters. That's another science competition that is national. And this is for our school. Now, in our school, we have almost around 150 students in 7th and 8th grade, and there is no possibility to interview them all. So we have a panel of judges that they screen the projects, and they're very meticulous. I applaud their hard work, and I sit along with them, but I never vote. As a science fair coordinator, I cannot vote. I choose not to vote, but I give my input about the work of if I am aware of the detail of the work of the student. So out of that 140-ish projects, the preliminary judging is selecting 30, 31, 29, depending on the year, of students who will have an interview. Last year, our final judging interview, school judging, was virtual, and this year it's going to be virtual. And the reason is that this year, county and state both are virtual. So the students get experience, and all the work that the students are doing is digital. And the final presentation is not a board, it's either PowerPoints or Google Slides, and they provide all the information. And what I do in our school, I grade their work periodically. Not every work is graded, but at certain portions I grade their work, which is taking part in their second and third quarter grades. And this we said already. Now, this is a sample timeline that when we start and how we meet the certain deadlines. So I have a deadline for topic proposal. Then I should have enough time to go over the topics and see which one is approved or not approved. And then after that, here is the deadline for pre-approval submission and the final date for pre-approval. And you see that in December 13, they submit material list and procedure. And I try to go over them before we break for Christmas, because during the Christmas break, they have good opportunity to conduct their experiment and collect data. And then the deadline for our school is February 4 for the students to submit everything. Again, this is digital. And then we have the preliminary judging and final judging, which gives me enough time to register the students who are selected. First, the student has to register, and then I have to approve their registration. So that takes time. And this is the link to the Padlet, which is provided by county. And I'm gonna get out of the slideshow and go to that link, explain a little bit what kind of information is provided on the Padlet. Do you see the Padlet? Yes?
No, we see your presentation right now. I think you have to switch.
Oh yeah,
to-
that's okay.
I'm
Now,
going
I have
to send the
no,
link,
I have to stop
to
sharing.
everyone.
I have
Yeah.
to stop sharing and share again.
Mhm. I just sent the link to everyone in the
No,
chat
this is-
room, so
this is-
you guys can check it out too. when you
Yeah,
have time.
so this is the link, and here on the Padlet that, as I said, is by Los Angeles County. Any kind of information, pre-approval, the process, safety rules, how to start, how to make the slides and everything is presented here. I'm gonna put this link in the chat.
I already did, Miss Lida.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's about it.
Lida, that was very
Thank you.
informative,
Thank you.
and I'm sure everyone got it.
Thank you.
So Dr. Injeyan will be discussing the judges, or like what the judges are looking for in their projects. Briefly giving him his background is he's a retired scientist currently teaching part-time at PCC, Pasadena Community College, and he's a technical consultant. He's a graduate of UCLA of engineering with a specialty in lasers and optics. He has 32 years of experience in aerospace, and the last 27 years was with Northrop Grumman. He's been a mentor, judge, he's also a parent, so he's been mentoring his own kids as well for the LA County Science Fairs, or like any type of science fair or competitions. He's been a judge at LA County State Science Fairs and AESA Science Olympiads, and he got the science the Judges Award in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. And I was really honored to be the one who was presenting that award to Dr. Injeyan. The
That
floor
was a
is
total surprise. We have a lot of good judges on AESA. Okay, let me share my screen with you. Okay. All right, Can anybody see the opening slide?
Yes, very well.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so Svetlana insisted that I embellish on my name and title here. So as Sona introduced me, I've been in aerospace for many years and a judge on the various levels for many years. Currently PCC instructor, retired from aerospace about 12 years ago. I started getting involved with science fair when my kids started attending Chamlian. And so throughout the years, I've been involved with the Chamlian Science Fair first as a parent, and then as a mentor, and of course, a judge for many, many years. My daughter is now 33 years old, and she started Chamlian at age 5. So it dates me back to about 28 years of involvement in science fair with Chamlian. And that kind of opened the door for me to be involved with also at LA County and the State Science Fair and so on. Okay, so let's move on. Okay, so I'm going to give you a judge's perspective. There's a little bit of overlap with what Lida already presented, but I'm going to focus on what the judges look for when they're evaluating a science fair project. And so as a background, I wanted again to emphasize some of the things that Lida just said. What are the objectives of the science fair project? So it's a learning experience, and part of that learning experience is to learn the principles of the scientific process or scientific method. Okay. It's an opportunity for the students to do some independent scientific work. It's an opportunity for the students to learn about the technical details involved in that work. As Lida mentioned, ideally above grade level, basically give them opportunity to explore beyond what's being taught in class. And also, ideally work with a mentor. The mentor can be a parent, it can be a teacher, it can be a professional, but working with a mentor is a good thing. It's not something that will ever be judged as being a bad thing. And I'll get a little bit more into that in a minute here. The most critical thing about this learning experiences, of course, is to learn about the scientific method. And so that's why I have this highlighted. Scientific process and scientific method is what we try to emphasize when we're evaluating projects. Okay, so what constitutes a successful project or an experiment? Okay, so what you're trying to do when you're doing a science fair project, what a student is trying to do, is to verify and validate a law of nature. Okay, so you want to identify a problem or a natural phenomenon, and then do some research on that particular problem and come up with a hypothesis. Okay, if I do this, this will happen, kind of a thing. Okay, that hypothesis cannot be up in the air. I mean, it cannot be something that the student kind of thought of, out of thin air. It has to be based on research. Okay, so when students tell me what their hypothesis is, the first question I ask them is, what is that based on? Okay, what research did you do to come up with this hypothesis? If they say, oh, I just thought of it, that's not a good thing. Okay, then once you identify what is it that you want to do and you have a hypothesis on what's going to happen if I do this, then you want to identify the key parameters that are involved in this particular problem. Okay, we call those variables. Okay, and then once you've defined those variables, what are the things that control this particular problem, you want to be able to do an experiment, and you want to do an experiment which tests your hypothesis. And what that is really is a description of the relationship between the various parameters that govern this particular law of nature. Okay, so that's what an experiment is. An experiment basically tells you, this is what happens if I do this. This is the relationship between force and acceleration. This is the relationship that I learned about and I based my hypothesis on, and look, my graph shows that relationship. Okay, right. The things that I caution people that I work with or parents is, a science project, a good science project, successful science project cannot consist of just a report. You do a little bit of research and then you write something, that's a good start, and it's good background for a project, but in itself cannot be a successful science fair project. And also a survey, okay, is not usually a very good science fair project. A survey, an example of a survey is a kid goes and gets a bunch of cleaning detergents, does some, washing of dirty clothes and says, oh, Tide cleans the best, okay? That is what I would call, that falls under the category of a survey, okay? You have not tested the law of nature. You have not identified, for example, what is it about Tide that is cleaning so much better, okay? You want to do an experiment, so you can start out, with a survey. You can say, okay, I did this survey and Tide came out the best. Now I need to know why Tide is the best, okay? And for that, I want to do a controlled experiment. For example, if you look at Tide and you see that Tide has a particular ingredient, let's call it hydrogen peroxide, okay? And you think that hydrogen peroxide may be the reason why Tide is cleaning better than the other products, then you do a systematic experiment where you vary the amount of hydrogen peroxide and you can show that indeed this is what's causing, Tide to do a better job than the other ones, okay? So that's kind of the distinction between a survey and an experiment that I try to emphasize with the kids. And finally, building a gizmo, a model, if you will, that does something cute, okay, a remote controlled car or something like that, in and of itself is not really a science experiment. It could be a demonstration of something, but unless you show what science is behind what you built, unless you use this gizmo to demonstrate some kind of law of nature, in a systematic way, then that would not be a very good, science project. Okay, so there's a tendency by a lot of students to have a particular interest or hobby, and then they try to do something related to that hobby. Okay. A lot of kids are interested in sport. They try to do an experiment with sport, so they go and test a bunch of different, basketballs, Wilson, Adidas or whatever, and they take a bunch of shots and say, oh, okay, I'm interested in basketball, and I did this experiment where I found out that Wilson basketballs are the best for, shooting free throws, for example. Okay, again, that is not, in itself a reason enough, to make it a good, interest in a topic, is not a good enough. There's got to be some science behind it. Okay. And finally, if you're looking, to do a very complex project, where you cannot control your variables, where you don't really understand what's going on, it does not necessarily make it a good project. Okay, so it's better to err on the side of being simple but understanding fully what's going on and do a good clean experiment than try to do something complex, hoping that the complexity is what's going to make you, advance. Okay, so again, coming back to the scientific method, which I consider the most important part of an experiment, of a science project. Here are the things that I would expect a student to do to make sure that they're following the scientific method, okay? First of all, you identify the key parameters that are involved in the law being tested, okay? Those are the variables, okay? The things that change around this particular law of nature, okay? Then you want to identify which are the variables that are independent. Those are the ones that you're going to control, you're going to change, okay? And then which ones are the ones that are dependent, which ones are going to change as a function of the independent variable that you're going to measure, okay? And, having a clear, identification of these and the interplay between these variables is very, very important, okay? And then you want to make sure, this is very critical for a good scientific method, science experiment, to make sure that both your variables, independent and dependent, are quantifiable, okay? You cannot eyeball a bunch of pieces of rag and say, oh, this is cleaner than the other one, okay? You have to quantify, and quantification is the essence of the scientific method. Quantification means you want to be able to assign a number and a unit to a particular variable, okay? If you cannot assign a number and a unit to a particular variable, chances are you're not doing a science experiment. Chances are you're probably doing a survey, okay? Tide, biz, and whatever, and cheer, they're not units, they're not quantifiable quantities. You cannot assign a number and a unit to tide, but you can assign a number and a unit to the amount of hydrogen peroxide in tide. Okay, so that distinction has to be very clear to the students. Okay, and a very, very important rule, okay, for the scientific method is that you vary one independent variable at a time. Okay, if you're doing an experiment and you think you're varying only one thing, but other things are changing at the same time, then you've completely violated the scientific method. Okay, a real obvious example of this, if you're trying to do an experiment with plants and one plant is sitting in the shade and the other plant is sitting in the sun, it doesn't matter what nutrients you're giving to the plant. If you're doing an experiment of how does the plant grow as a function of a particular nutrient, there's another variable involved here that is messing up your experiment, basically, the amount of sunlight, for example. Okay, so make sure that you're only changing one variable at a time. A subtle variable that comes into a lot of experiments is temperature. You're doing something and you don't realize that what you're doing is changing the temperature of your experiment. This happens a lot in chemistry experiments. You're trying to do a chemical experiment, you're adding a particular reagent, but you don't realize that as you're adding this reagent, not only the rate of experiment might be changing, but also the temperature of the solution is changing. Okay, so you want to make sure that you're controlling the variables in such a way that you're only varying one variable at a time. Okay, and then for life science projects, okay, life science projects have a tendency to be more complex. You want to have what we call the statistically significant sample. You cannot take one plant, and give it a certain amount of nutrients, and take another plant, give it more, and then take another plant and give it more, and make any conclusions on that, because of the genetic differences in living things. Okay, so you want to always have a statistically significant sample, meaning you're going to have 3 or 4 plants, minimum 3, ideally 4 or 5 plants that you're feeding the same amount of nutrient, and then again a group of 3 to 5 that you're feeding more nutrients, and then again 3 to 5 that you're feeding even more, and now you can average over the growth rate of the plants and come up with some reasonable trend as far as what this particular nutrient is doing. So statistically significant sample, because of the genetic differences in the subjects, is very, very important. The question that I ask the students when I'm talking to them about this, I have Harry and I have John, and I say, look, Harry and John, suppose, when you were born, we put you in the same room and fed you the exact same food, for the next 10 years. Do you expect to be exactly the same height? Assuming that, for example, Harry is much shorter than John. Okay, the answer is no, because there are genetic differences. So if you're trying to establish the effect of a particular variable on life science projects, on living things, you want to have a statistically significant sample. So this page is probably the most important takeaway from my presentation. Okay, and that's how one goes about implying the scientific method. So some other important steps that I kind of mentioned in passing is that you want to do some background research. Okay, it is really unrealistic to expect that a student can come up with a totally original idea and do a good science experiment on that totally original idea. Okay, that is a very, very high bar. Okay, it's an unrealistic bar. Okay, and so anything that a student can probably think of or can come up with, especially at the junior high and high school level, has been done by a professional at some point, somewhere. Okay, and so what you want to do is you want to go back and do a bunch of research and learn about what other people have done and see if that will guide you, towards doing a good experiment. Okay. A classic thing that I see routinely happening is a student will say, okay, I want to, learn whether music affects the growth of plants. Okay. And so they have typically, maybe 1 or 2 plants or 3 plants, and they play rock and roll to one plant. They play classical music to the other plant. They play, pop to the other one, and try to make a conclusion out of that. And I tell them, well, okay, so tell me what you learned in your research about how music affects plants. And inevitably, the answer is they haven't done any research on that. In fact, there is very little, if any, research that validates that classical music helps plants grow better than rock and roll. Okay, and so it is very important that the students do some background research, not only to learn about what's been done before, but also to see if what they're trying to do is even realistic. Okay, if there's no research whatsoever on something, or there is some limited research and the results are negative, then you want to move on to another project. Okay, you want to make sure you have the right equipment to measure whatever you're measuring for your project, so that's kind of important. And then, because as I said, it is unrealistic to expect somebody to do totally new work, if you are doing something which has been done before and there's a well-defined theory behind it, there's a well-defined equation that explains what's going to go on, okay, then you want to make sure that you compare your results to that theory, okay, to what's been done before, to what's been established before. Okay, and if you're able to match the theory, wonderful. Okay, within some error bars, of course. If you are not able to match the theory, and that's not necessarily a very bad thing, but you can explain very well and quantify, why you deviated so much from the theory. Okay, that could be a plus also. Okay, so comparing results to theory is very important, to show that for the student to show that they have learned, they've done background research, and they understand what's going on. Okay, and of course, Lida mentioned, in life science projects, you want to have a control. You want to have a set of, life science test articles that you're not doing anything to. Okay, that you're either, if you're changing the amount of nutrients, you're either giving them just water, or you're letting things be alone, or whatever. So that's very important for life science projects. Now for the chemistry and physics things, you usually have a 0 point. So, control is kind of self-evident, but for life science projects, you definitely want to have a control. Okay, so once you have done all this background work and you have, come up with an experiment, you have quantifiable variables, and you know that you're following a scientific method, you want to present your results, right? And results inevitably in almost any scientific work is in the form of a graph, okay? The independent variable is on the x-axis, the dependent variable is on the y-axis, okay? And you want to label your axes with the variable and the units and the values. In other words, I'll give you an example in a minute here. You want to make sure that your axes are labeled, okay? Both axes, the x and y axis, they're labeled by the variable that's varying along that particular axis, and of course the units by which they are quantified. Okay, so ideally, as I mentioned earlier, you want to compare your results, to theory, so you can generate a theoretical curve based on an equation, and then you can show your data, on the same graph, and then it will become very obvious whether your data follows the theoretical prediction or not. Okay, and of course, Lida also mentioned this. When you're doing an experiment, you don't do it just once. You do it multiple times, and there's always small variations, in your experiment, and so you want to make sure that you show the range over which your experiments have varied. Okay, that's we call the error bars. Okay, and ideally, your theoretical prediction falls within the error bars of your experiment. Okay, so before I go to a graph and talk and kind of illustrate what I'm talking about, let me very quickly mention about the difference between hard science and soft science. Okay, so hard sciences is what I call, mathematics, mathematics, physics, chemistry, many biological sciences, basically have some kind of a theory behind it, have some kind of a mathematical expression, an equation of some sort behind it that describes the process. Okay, this equation can be very simple or it can be quite complex. Okay, but there usually is some equation that describes the process that you're trying to validate, that you're trying to demonstrate. Soft sciences typically are based on statistics. Okay, a lot of the behavioral sciences work is done statistically. In other words, they go and they evaluate 10,000 people, okay, and they generate some trends, and basically and then when they generate these trends, they also do statistical analysis on these trends, and they say, look, 90% of the people do this, 90% of the women are prettier than the men. Okay, it's kind of an obvious statement, but that's just a very, very rough example. And also when you do statistical analysis, you show the standard deviation. You say, okay, one standard deviation constitutes plus or minus 17%, whatever it was, I forgot. That's where most of the people fall, and then you go one standard deviation outside of that, and then outside of that, and you have some kind of a distribution. Okay, so that distribution can be Gaussian, like a lot of natural things are, or it could be something different. It could be a skewed distribution, it could be a Lorentzian distribution. Anyway, so anything that you do in the soft sciences to make it a good experiment, you almost have to do a statistical analysis. Statistical analysis works best if you have lots of samples. So you want to emphasize to your students that if you're doing this behavioral science experiment, you want to have lots of, lots of people, lots of examples. And, that will help you do a nice statistical analysis on what you're doing. Okay. So then this kind of shows, the distinction between what I consider a good way to present your work and a not so good way to present your work. Okay. So on the left, you have a very nice graph. This is a scatter plot. Okay. And you have the independent variable on the bottom. You have the dependent variable on the side. You have, the appropriate numbers. You also specify the units that you're measuring your variables in. And then you show the data that you've collected. You show the range of the data. That's, what the error bars are. It's these, these guys here. Okay, so this is the range over which you generated. The dot will be the average of your data. And then, to compare it with the theory, you draw a line that corresponds to theory. Okay, and now, a judge will look at this and know exactly, what the experiment was, what was the range of the data, how does it compare to theory, and now it kind of opens up, for example, a discussion with the judge, where the judge will ask you, at large values of the independent variable, looks like your data is deviating a little bit from theory. Do you understand why that is? Okay, and if you can give a good explanation to that, you score a lot of points. Okay, so this is, why I emphasize this type of graph to illustrate your data, and the judges will really appreciate that. Now, a lot of kids like bar graphs, okay, and they will present their data as bar graphs, and usually, they're confused about what to put for the, independent variables. Sometimes they're names like tide, cheer, biz, or whatever, okay, and you have these, variation between them, often, that variation does not show a very good trend, because it's not designed, the bar graph is not designed to show trends very well. And so you'd be hard pressed to come up with conclusions, scientific conclusions, from this kind of a graph. Now, if this is a behavioral science project, then potentially you can say, okay, these are all the people that I've tested. This is the average, this is the standard deviation, and it basically tells me that within one standard deviation, everybody that I tested, has good memory or has bad memory or whatever. Okay, so you can do that kind of stuff, but again, when you're doing behavioral science projects, statistical analysis becomes critical, for you to make a good impression with the judges. Okay, finally, the project board is kind of important, because that's how you're presenting all your work. So I have listed here all the things that you want to put on your board. You want to put the apps, you want to have an abstract, you want to put the problem or objective, what hypothesis you came on, you came up with, what is the research, you might want to have a page of research, highlighting, what supports your hypothesis, a description of the apparatus that you use, the equipment that you use, a procedure, how you systematically went about doing your experiment, your data, which inevitably has got to be a graph. Okay, if you don't have a graph, boy, that's it's very tough to score good points with the judges if you don't have a graph. And finally, the conclusion. What does your graph show? What are the trends? What what conclusions can you make based on your results of your experiment. Okay, and finally, of course, you want to show some references for your research. You want to have a bibliography and an acknowledgement of the people that helped you, your mentors, your parents, or whatever. Okay, now, I always tell my students, judges, are stressed. Okay, they have a lot of projects to review. They're always worried about whether they're making the right calls and stuff. And so what they want to do is they want to come up to a project and have a really good idea right away of what that project is about, what the results were, what the conclusions were. Okay, and so the abstract is what's going to give him that. Okay, so the abstract is critical. Okay, and a judge, has to be able to read the abstract, one page, no more than a page, has to be able to read the abstract and already feel good about knowing, all the critical points about this particular project. And the abstract should have an abbreviated, sentence or two about all of these things. Okay. And, I can't emphasize enough how important that is, because if I walk up to a project and there is no abstract, and then I read the abstract and I learn nothing about the project, I'm already pissed off, okay? Because I have a lot of projects to look at, and now I have to go systematically look at the board. Whereas before, if I have a really good abstract, then I can zero in on the parts that I think, the student should be doing well, and see if he has indeed done it well, okay? And so again, the abstract is critical. Cute titles, fancy artwork, over-the-top glitzy displays, can be turned off, okay, because they distract, okay, they distract. What the judge wants to do is look at the projects, know exactly what was done, what were the conclusions, how well it was done, and then move on, okay? Okay, so then, you come to the final oral presentation. So again, typically in a lot of science fairs, this is not what I presented here is not unique to LA County. It's pretty generic as far as science fairs are concerned. So a lot of science fairs, there's a phase where you have, the students are not there and you select finalists, and then you have the oral presentation. Okay, so it's very critical. The abstract stuff that I described and the board and stuff is critical especially for that phase where the student is not even there. Okay, and then when if a student is a finalist or is actually have an oral presentation, then you expect the students to describe the process. Okay, problem, what is the problem, what research did you do, what hypothesis you came up with, what are the equipment, how did you use the equipment, what results did you get, and what conclusions did you draw from your results. So this has to be a systematic march through your board, okay? And if you did an experiment and you had some initial bad results, that taught you something that you learned from, that's wonderful, okay? And if you can explain that and then show how you rebounded from that and did a better experiment, that's good too, okay? You have to be able to explain deviations from theory, as I mentioned before. And then, you want to rehearse the presentation, but don't try to memorize it, okay? A lot of students try to memorize it or try to just read everything that's on the board. That's not good. You want to be able to identify the key points about your experiment, emphasize those as you're presenting, as you're going systematically to the thing, and refer to the board as you need to emphasize what is it that you're saying. Invented buzzwords can be turned off. Some students try to create buzzwords or they think they're being creative, and it could be distracting. Arrogance is a big turnoff. you know, I am the best, you know, I did this, nobody else could have done it, that kind of stuff. That's pretty obvious. You know, totally unscientific assertions can be deadly. I don't care how religious you are, you don't bring it to science fair, okay? I mean, that's pretty important, you know. You know, students gotta learn to separate the two, all right? I mean, you might think everything that's happening on your project is the work of God, but that's not what we're there to judge. That's not what we're there to determine. What we want to do, I mean, you know, I run this a lot, and especially from, you know, parochial schools, religious schools and stuff, you know. You know, and they sometimes they try to structure an experiment around a religious belief of some sort. It just doesn't work. They're two separate things. You know, more power to you if you have, you know, religious faith, but keep it outside of, you know, outside of science. And of course, at the end, you also want to acknowledge people who helped you. I think that is all I have. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for listening.